right. Hello and welcome to the Coaching Conversation podcast. This is your host, Salah Elleithy, and I am excited to have with me today Brian Tarallo. Brian is a visual facilitator and change maker, and he is one of the folks that I go to when I have questions about visual thinking. Brian, welcome.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Before we start, I usually ask this question: how did you get into this line of work? And what's sort of the story behind getting involved in facilitation and change management?
Yeah, I appreciate that. This is, I'll give you the short version. So I got into this through the direct path of corporate finance, which is, so I got my master's in finance. And then what ended up happening, first of all, a lot of people don't know this, but the difference between finance and accounting is that accounting tends to look in the rearview mirror, finance tends to look through the windshield. And I always like looking ahead. And so I loved like planning scenarios and doing pro formas and things like that. That was the thing that just, was like, okay, does it make sense to do this investment or not? That was always fun for me. So it wasn't too hard to go from finance into strategic planning.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you've ever done any strategic planning, Salah, but if you have, you've noticed that you can't just roll into an organization and write their strategic plan for them. You have to facilitate.
Mm-hmm.
And so I sort of came into facilitation as a need more than anything else. And it was just as a requirement in order to get the information that I needed in order to write strategic plans for different organizations. And then I fell into the strategic planning thing and the facilitation thing, sort of, well, I ended up doing the facilitation thing more and more. So that's kind of how I got to it. It was sort of a, ABC type thing, not a direct path.
I can relate to that because I came from accounting. So I'm
Mm.
kind of like the rear view mirror part of it. I studied accounting and I was in that space just a few years before I decided that I really want to help people see things clearly, which again, accounting is just recording transactions so that we
Hmm.
can see how things are and where we want to go next. And that was sort of transition into coaching and facilitation and helping, like you said, people see results or come together and move forward. So I know you also founded this company. You have a company or practice called Lizard Brain.
Hmm.
I'm very curious about the name. I sense that there's a story behind the name.
I mean, yeah, there is. Do you want the long version or the short version?
I've got time, so
You got time.
you pick.
All right, so we'll do the long version, which is long, and the short version, which is short. All right, so the long version is that there's if you were to take your brain and slice it right down the middle from the top of your head towards your nose, right? Like
Mhm.
laterally that way, and split in the middle like a peach. What you'd find is that the pit of the peach is what we call the limbic system. Okay, the outer fleshy part, the peachy part, the part you actually want to eat, that's the neocortex, right? Also known as the prefrontal cortex, is if it's in the front. And all of the neuroscientists, which I'm sure your podcast attracts thousands of them, are going to be just appalled at my explanation of it, but it's good enough, right? So the neocortex, the outer part of the peach, is the part that's responsible for, among other things, language, analysis, rational thought, the spotlight of our attention, our sense of identity, right? It's sort of like, okay, this is me. It's the outer peachy part. Evolutionarily speaking, it's also one of the newer parts of the brain, right? It's one of the younger parts of the brain. It hasn't been around that long. The core of the peach is the part that's been around for a long time. That's called the limbic system. So the limbic system is responsible for like autonomic responses, the fight or flight. The amygdala is in there. The amygdala being this like little almond-shaped doohickey that is responsible for the fight, flight, or freeze response. And so it's all of the stuff that you could think of it as almost like the operating system of the brain. It's the stuff that operates in the background that you're not even aware of. That limbic system, which again is the core of the thing and a little bit of the brainstem, that's the also known as the reptilian brain or the lizard brain, because evolutionarily speaking, it's one of the oldest parts of the brain. And in group dynamics and facilitation, it is the reason why when somebody says something that we don't like, we automatically don't like them rather than
Mm.
focusing on the idea, right? It's that, again, fight, flight, freeze response that's there. And so I like to play around with neuroscience. Obviously, I'm not like that great at it. I like to bring in a little bit of psychology. And plus, I didn't want to have like Tarallo Associates. I thought that was a little bit, too much. I thought that Lizard Brain would be a more fun name for the company. And we
Yeah.
try to bring in like fun and creativity. Besides that, that was a long version. So the short version is, my name is Brian. My wife's name is Liz. Liz and Brian, lizard brain. So there you
Oh,
go.
wow.
There's that too.
Wow. I think anyone who works with groups needs to have some ideas around like how brain function, even at the basic level,
Right.
just to understand how people react or respond in the group settings.
Let me give you an activity you can do with groups that's based around this. Okay. So one of my favorite activities is called Visual Explorer. Okay. Now,
Mm.
the way that traditionally it works is you take a whole deck of pictures, like this card deck of pictures, and you lay it out in front of your participants so that they can see all these different images and things. Okay. It's everything you could think of, right? There's close-ups of pliers, there's like fine art, there's stuff from galleries, there's all kinds of pictures. And so traditionally what you do with Visual Explorer is that you say, pick an image that represents dot, dot, dot. So for example, you're there for a strategic plan, pick an image that represents what a successful strategy looks like. You're doing team building, pick an image that represents a successful team. You're doing some leadership development. Pick an image that for you exemplifies what good leadership looks like. So what you do is you have people traditionally pick an image and then explain the image. Okay, why does that represent fill in the blank, right? Here's what I like to do, making use of that whole peach pit thing that we were talking about a second ago. Remember, the peach pit, the center of the brain, the limbic system, the lizard brain, that is the part of the brain. It's not responsible for analysis, but it is responsible for emotions and decisions. It's also the faster part of the brain. So here's what I like to do. I like to lay all the cards out, and I like to say, okay, pick an image that you're drawn to. Don't overthink it, just pick up an image, right? And they're like, oh, I like the monkey on the unicycle. So they pick up the monkey that's on the unicycle. And then I give them the prompt, which is to say, okay, how does this represent our strategy? Well, we've got to be well balanced.
Mm.
Now, that's actually more psychologically correct because the way that our brains work is that we make a decision and then we justify it. For all of our work as facilitators, doing participatory decision making, we like to think that we do the analysis first and then we make a decision. Most of the time when people roll into the room, they've already made their decision and they spend the next 55 minutes justifying what it is, right? So if you do it that way, if you say, okay, name your preference and then let's talk about it, you can actually make use of the way that the brain is actually designed. You make the decision and then you justify it later. And then it's like, okay, once I've said my piece, then I can see other people's perspective, but I got to say my piece first.
I think that drawing or having some visual
Oh
is a
yeah.
good prompt for people to start to think. I mean, a lot of times, at least for me, I have to prepare a thing, but if you give me a picture,
Mm,
it's easier to say, okay, describe this. You know, what does this look like, or how is this related to leadership, for example, or why did you pick this particular picture? That's an interesting shortcut or a shortcut way to instead of asking like what do you think, people tend to take a longer route to get to that
right,
point.
right. One of the things that we talk about in facilitation are the idea of the different dynamics that are in the room. And one of those dynamics, one of those polarities that's pulling on two separate centers of gravity is on the one hand, the center of gravity towards advocacy, which is to say, I'm going to make this decision. Here's what I believe. Here's my agenda. So advocacy on the one hand, and then on the
Mm,
other side, inquiry, which is I'm going to be more divergent. I'm going to explore. I'm going to be in conversation and discussion. And so one of the things that we have to attenuate when we're in the room is the group moving too fast towards advocacy, or are they kind of hanging out too long in the inquiry side of things? In other words, are they just talking around something and not making the decision, or is groupthink at work? And do I need to pull them back into a space where they can keep the aperture open a little bit
mm.
longer?
I think that's a good way to look at a spectrum or a range because some
Mhm.
groups they jumped into action too soon, and some groups they take a long time to get to action, and they may even not really have a clear idea what the action is because they have so much ideas that they get lost in the details and not focus at the end to move
Right.
forward.
Sometimes they use discussion as cover because they're not safe. They don't feel comfortable actually
Mm,
making the decision. I was telling you I had kind of a rocky facilitation earlier today. That's exactly what was happening, right?
mm,
Anytime the group got close to making a decision, somebody else would go off mute and they'd be like, well, here's the thing that we haven't thought about. It's like, no, no, we've already thought about that. You just don't want to
yeah,
decide, right? Because
yeah,
you might be on the hook for where this decision is going. So again,
yeah.
sometimes people will like to hang out in the discussion space.
Yeah.
because there's
It's
accountability
comfortable.
and responsibility that happens with that decision. So the more we can just sort of discuss about things and chew the fat, like the less I will be held accountable and responsible for actually making something happen.
It aligns with groups and individuals, right? A lot of
Hmm.
times we tend to, or groups, as you mentioned, they tend to have this conversation. It's never ending. There is, we always want to continue because it's comfortable, right? It's no, there's no stakes in the conversation. Anyone can say anything, but there is no, action that comes out of the conversation at the end. So I know we jumped right into it, but I want to step back and ask about how do you define visual facilitation? Because a lot of times people know visual facilitation. Maybe I'm assuming here also because some people don't really know what facilitation is. A lot
Right.
of times we think it's just having someone moderating the discussion or
Mm.
keeping time, or that's a lot of times it's still that's what people think of when they think of facilitation.
It can be. I've heard and cataloged a bunch of different definitions for facilitation. Not all of them I personally agree with.
Right.
And I don't want to throw anybody under the bus. I would say that there are limits to it. Right now, let me do it this way. Rather than throw a bunch of my colleagues under the bus, let me tell you about the kind of facilitation that I do and see if it squares with you. So in my role as a facilitator, here's why people usually come to me. They'll say, hey, Brian, we've got this event, we've got this meeting, and at the end of this meeting, we want to walk out of here with, for example, a strategic plan. We don't know how to get from point A to point B. Can you help us do that? And I say, yes, I can. The way that we're going to do that is, for example, let's take what you think the table of contents is for your strategic plan, pages 1 through 8. And what we're going to do is we are going to come up with a visual template, a large wall chart, right? We're going to come up with 8 of them, one for each one of those pages. And we're going to have your people go to work where they populate those blank templates with their ideas. And traditionally we do this with sticky notes. So we might do, one of those might be a SWOT analysis, right? Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So we set it up, we put it on the wall as a nice quad chart. We say, okay, everybody grab your sticky notes and give us your best strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats for this organization. And they populate it out and you got a whole bunch of sticky notes. And then somebody follows along and they consolidate those ideas. They say, what is similar here? And they turn that into the final product. So let me take a step back and tell you what my job is. I work with clients to design process to achieve their outcome. So that means coming up with the agenda, coming up with, I like to think of as the facilitator's guide. Some people call it a run of show, but it's really, we're going to go from A to B to C to D, and that's how we're going to get your outcome that's there. My job is to own the process, not the product. So I tend to stay on the balcony and not the dance floor. So my job is to make sure that, we're keeping on time, that I've set up the right activities, that I've set up the right discussions, that the flow is correct, that the output of one conversation builds into and becomes the input of another conversation, and that I'm making sure that I'm creating a space of psychological safety so that we can hear all voices. Because to me, that's the big success. It's not necessarily about agreement. It is about bringing all ideas into the room. Now, again, that's my definition. That's often called process facilitation, but there's all different kinds of facilitation that are out there. Okay, you asked about visual facilitation. Well, I kind of just told you that. So the visual facilitation component of it is where we use visuals to help that process. Now, in the example that I just gave you, I'm designing 8 visual templates, one for each section of the strategic plan, that the group then populates with their ideas. So how does visual facilitation show up? It is the intersection on that Venn diagram of facilitated group process and then just use of visuals. I hesitantly say PowerPoint, right? PowerPoint's not necessarily interactive.
Mm.
PowerPoint transmits ideas. What I'm talking about are wall charts, tabletop templates, sticky notes. If you are a facilitator who happens to use sticky notes, you are a visual facilitator. So I tend to have kind of an inclusive definition of visual facilitation, except when we're talking about PowerPoint, because again, that tends to be one-way communication.
The visual facilitation is fascinating to me. I'm glad you're including also the use of flip charts or
Hmm.
sticky notes or Sharpies, having people write things and post things and organize things. But it's also the element of visual facilitation that I see in your profession, or at least from the visual standpoint, is like the art, the illustration of the
Yeah.
ideas and the creativity that comes out when a visual facilitator is drawing the
Yes. Yes.
how the meeting is going.
Okay, so that's a related but related practice. It's a different but related practice. So when you see, for example, so let me paint another picture for you. Let's say you're in a big conference, I don't know, 300 people in the room, and you see somebody set up a large board, okay? And they are drawing what they are hearing. They're effectively taking large scale visual notes. So that is called graphic recording. It's a little bit
Mm,
different than visual or graphic facilitation. Now, people are like, well, wait a minute, what's the difference here? So the graphic facilitator is one who is responsible for literally facilitating the group. Like they're there, they're holding the space, they're queuing up activities, they have designed the process that's being used. Whereas the graphic recorder is sort of a silent scribe, right?
mm,
They are the one who is like taking the visual notes that's there. Now, I do a little bit of the visual or the graphic recording, I should say, but typically I use that to augment visual facilitation that I happen to be doing. So, for example, if I've got a client who says, all right, we need to get everybody on the same page and the CEO is going to talk for 90 minutes, I'm like, okay, great. As while the CEO is talking, I'm going to have my boards up. I'll be drawing what we hear, and then that will be good context setting to move into the group work. Does that make
mm.
sense?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I know that they are different, and I was going to ask about the difference, but you just
No, sorry.
highlighted the difference. Um, no, that's fine. Like it seems like the visual facilitator or facilitation in general is guiding the group towards an outcome, and the
Yeah.
and the facilitator is helping them sort of navigate the process. The recording, the graphic recording, is more about the essence of what's being heard and capturing what's
Yep.
going on in the meeting. Does that capture the sort of the
Yeah, that's
essence?
good. I like to think of as the graphic recorder as the silent scribe,
Mm,
the visual note taker. I think that those things are synonymous. I like to think of the visual facilitator as the one who is, as you said, guiding the process, right? It's almost like a referee role. Like I'm not telling them
mm.
where to go, right? I'm not leading the process. That's different. But I am saying, okay, here's the boundaries within which we're going to have this conversation.
So when you're with a group, what do you usually do to prepare, or at least get the setup for the group to
You
come
mean like the
together?
physical setup in the room?
Yeah, physical or preparation in general. Physical maybe a one aspect of it, but there is
Yeah.
probably more than just the physical space.
That's a good question. So, compared to a lot of my colleagues, the longest discovery call of anybody else that I've worked with before. So, for example, somebody sends me an email. They say, "Hey, we've got this thing. We want you to be a part of it." I set up a discovery call, which is my initial intake, and it's going to be at a minimum 45 minutes long. Now, I've had plenty of business coaches that are like, "Well, Brian, that's too long for you to figure out if you actually want to work with these people." I'm like, not really, because that's like my make or break moment right there. I want them to experience what design and work with me might look like. Not only that, I tend to come in with a whole lot of energy and a whole lot of creativity. And, I'm not the most buttoned up kind of guy when I'm facilitating. And I would rather people know that up front because I'm not everybody's cup of tea. So the more that they work with me in the discovery call, the better of a sense that we get. Right. I mean, I've got more certifications well, I got a lot. I got a whole bunch of certifications in facilitation, but that doesn't mean I'm going to be everybody's person, and that's perfectly okay. All right. So the first thing that I want people to know when we're having our discovery call is what atmosphere am I going to bring into the room? Mine tends to be, lighthearted, energetic, creative, very upbeat. I never want to have a boring meeting. Okay. I am not the Zen kind of, we're going to contemplate our navel. If you want somebody like that, I got plenty of people that are fantastic at that kind of thing, but this is just not my shtick. Right.
Mm.
So the first thing I want them to know is what kind of experience they are going to get with me. The first thing that I want to know from them before anything else is what do they want to achieve? At the end of the day, what does success look like? What are the outcomes? If we were to walk out of the room having achieved something that we could plant a flag and declare success, what is that thing? Right. After that, I want to know about the participants. How many are there? What's their relationship with each other? Are they total strangers? Is this part of an intact team? Are there power dynamics that are going on? Are there reporting relationships that are there? Are there any agendas that are coming in? Any kind of interpersonal stuff that might get in the way of people being their best selves? So I want to know about the participants. Okay. We spend a lot of time talking about logistics. So when is it? Where is it? I love to talk about the room and the setup of the room. I have refused to facilitate in certain rooms when the client, for example, has said, yeah, we need this to be a really participatory session and really co-creative and, high energy and a lot of small groups. And we're going to be doing this at a boardroom table. I'm like, sorry, it's not compatible with
Right.
what you want to do. Right. And they're like, seriously, you don't want to do the work just because of the table? I'm like, yeah, I don't want to do the work just because of the table. So the room matters. Obviously these days, doing virtual, doing in person, doing hybrid, figuring out, I hate it when you go into a space and they're like, hey, just to let you know, Joey's not going to be here, but he's going to be dialing in on Teams. Is that okay? So like just the baseline logistics of it.
Mm.
Usually my clients tell me the context of what it is that, is actually bringing us together. So why are we getting together? What's the history of their organization? And most importantly, the thing that I want to know besides achieve, what is it that you want to achieve? The most important thing that I want to know is what kind of meeting is this? Is this the kind of meeting where you're just going to share a bunch of information? If so, that's fine, right? I'm happy to be your MC and help you out with your presentation and make it a little bit more palatable for folks. So it's not death by PowerPoint, but I want to know if this is the kind of meeting where you're just going to inform folks. Or is this the kind of meeting where you're going to want to sell something? And we sell stuff all the time. We sell good ideas. We sell visions, right? We sell new policies. Do you want to motivate and persuade people, right? Or is this the kind of meeting where you want to bring in people's ideas? Is this an ideation session? Is this a town hall? Is this soliciting advice and feedback, right? Or finally, is this, no kidding, a call for participatory decision making? Where if at the end of the day, we do not walk out of the room with a clear direction and agreed upon decision, that will be failure. So again,
Mm.
what kind of meeting is this? Is this a tell, sell, consult, or a co-create? And by the way, I borrowed that from Peter Senge. You can read more about it in his book, The Fifth Discipline. I think it's required reading. Okay. Okay. So to recap,
We
your
recorded
big,
a presentation together on that too, so
yeah,
people.
that was a good one. You can go back and look at that. So we'll put the link into the show notes, I bet. Let me summarize what I just said, okay?
Mhm.
Participants, logistics, achieve, context, experience, and then we're going to reference our friend Peter Senge, PLACES. It stands for places, okay? So that mnemonic I have in the back of my mind when I'm doing discovery. Once I've got that, I've got about 80% of what I need in order to do a solid design.
I'm hearing the words that I want to highlight, like the design. There's an
Hmm.
intentionality behind, setting up the meeting, the space, let's say, because, meeting is can be very limited or limiting. People think of meeting as just like coming together and just, talking about some things, but we're talking about like setting the space for the work to happen and
Right.
to come out with something that is potentially can help the group work better or decide on something that could take them to the next level. So there are many different meetings. So the design matters in terms of how you design the space. And I like the example you gave about like the physical space, even that if it doesn't align with
Hmm.
the intention, then that's not really going to work.
Right.
People sitting around the table and designing this meeting to be creative and people, getting up and moving around, and that's going to be in the way of getting to that outcome.
Hmm.
So
Yeah,
design
that's right.
is a big part of it.
Yeah, I like to say that 90% of the work is done before the meeting ever starts, right? And that, to your point, that's the thoughtful, intentional design of each one of the major muscle movements that we're going to have during the meeting. And, to your point about, the room, really quickly, I did this thing recently where, for whatever reason, I wasn't able to see the room beforehand. They wanted, oh yeah, high collaboration, and then sure enough, we get into this thing, and there's this giant boardroom table in the middle. I'm like, ah, gosh darn it. Now
Mm.
here's the thing. This was the cool part. This wasn't like a typical big slab table, right? It's not like a big, 2001 monolith. It happened to be like a giant donut, right? Like Knights of the Round Table type thing, except it was like hollow in the middle. So I actually had the participants jump over the table and we did the whole thing standing in the center of this big open space that was there. That's what the meeting called for. If it had been death by PowerPoint, fine, camp out around the thing. But they wanted it to be collaborative. They wanted it to be participatory. And so it has to be embodied in that way. You
Mm.
got to get people's hands on stuff if you want it to be hands on.
That's another element is like the embodiment of how we show up in the meeting in terms of, if the meeting is designed for PowerPoint slides,
Mhm.
how people will show up at that point. They just like step back and watch, enjoy the show kind of kind
Right.
of meeting. But if it's designed to for participation and having people collaborate and make decisions together, that requires a different level of design and energy and bringing the group together, whether it's physical or virtual. So design is one element, and then you talk about the space as well, how the space
Mhm.
is set up. What else is there at the end that could help make or break this discussion or this space?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So if we take a look at the reason that meetings go off the rails, I think it's because we haven't done a good job telling people why we want them to show up and what their role is. Oftentimes we invite people, it's like, okay, Salah's got to be there. And then you don't tell them what you want from him. Okay.
Mm,
And so what people traditionally do is that they will default to a place of strength. And a lot of people who've been around for a while, their place of strength is their expertise. And so what they do is, we start a discussion and they sit back and they elocute, they opine, they say, well, here's what we did back in 1973, right? And they just kind of and they get stuck on that discussion doom loop, right? Of that doom
mm,
spiral there where they're just talking about stuff, but nobody's actually making a decision. So I say it's easy, it's actually hard. I think that something that we should do a better job of as meeting organizers is to tell people explicitly, here's what we're looking for you to do. And you can go back to that sell, tell, consult, co-create thing, right? Like if it is a tell, we want you to be informed, maybe ask a few questions, but we want you to go off and do this thing. Stand up and salute smartly. That's your job.
mm,
Not to tell us what your opinion is. And you can be that clear about it, right? If you got an opinion, save it for later. This is an informative session. If it's a sell, we want to persuade you. We want you to get on board the bus with us, right? We want to dial into your favorite radio station, WIIFM. What's in it for me? We want you to like come and join the movement with us. That's a sell.
mm.
If it's a consult, we want your advice. We want your feedback. We want your ideas. We do not necessarily need your agreement. Okay. We just want to hear your side of the beach ball. Here's the beach ball. If you're off camera, you can't see it, but I've got a beach ball in my hand right now. Depending on which side of the beach ball we're looking at, it's going to show up differently. Our goal with a consult is to bring in as many different perspectives as possible so we can get a whole picture of what this thing looks like. Okay. If it is a co-create, we want your decisions. However, no good idea fairies. There is no team waiting outside the doors, waiting to implement all of the bright ideas that we come up with. Okay. We are the ones that are ultimately responsible for what it is that we decide on. And so if there's none of this like we should do this. Okay, fine. Who's going to be that person that does it?
Yeah.
Because if you can't be responsible and accountable for your decisions, you got no place in the meeting.
I mean, that's a lot to think about, a lot to think about when designing meetings. And
Mhm.
sometimes organizations or companies, they having a meeting to them is just like, let's jump on a call and have a meeting. There's
Yeah,
no,
yeah,
and again, like, yeah, there are some meetings that are quick and we don't need to have a lot of preparation, but knowing the type, I think that model that you
yes,
described from Peter Senge is very applicable or relevant because a lot of times we don't know what type of meeting
right.
we're in.
It can be super fast. Let me give you an example. Okay, and I'll give you a couple of competing ideas for this one. Let's say that this is a weekly stand-up, right? Let's say that it's a Scrum meeting. I know you're kind of the agile guy, so let's dip our toes into agile space. Okay, everybody, welcome to our weekly scrum. We are going to do a quick go around, which is to say we're going to hear from everybody. You're going to have 90 seconds. Tell us what you're working on, what challenges you're having, and any requests that you've got. And we're going to do this alphabetically. So Amy, you kick us off. Go, right? Okay. Just like that, I have walked through the outcome, the agenda, the roles, and the ground rules. And I've also announced, not in so many words, this is an informative meeting. So the purpose of this is not to get into a technical exchange, right? The purpose of this is not to like dive into the details. It is to make requests, and then if there are any, those people can loop back afterward. Okay. Now that's a tactical meeting. So picture for a second I'm going to share another model with you. We'll have to do this like, verbally, not visually, which is hard for me. Okay. But we're going to try it anyway. I want you to picture three concentric circles.
Mhm.
Now, in the center of that circle, that's the tactical, right? So that's the day-to-day stuff. That's us operating on plan. Okay. The next circle out, that's operational. So that is, are we on plan? Tactical is doing the plan. The operational is pausing for a second to say, all right, how are we with our metrics? Are we behind? Are we over? How do we stand performance-wise relative to our plan? And then if you go to the next circle out, that's the strategic side. Okay. So strategic is let's make the plan. So
Mhm.
strategic, we make the plan. Operational, are we on plan? Tactical, we're doing the plan. By the way, this one comes from, a certain element within the military. So you can check that one out. It's kind of cool.
Mhm.
I think that facilitation works up and down across those levels. But where it really, really, really shines is at that strategic level. That's where you're doing that real strategic pause. You're getting outside of the office. You're putting some real strategic space into it, right? Now, clearly, I've got a bias having done strategic planning for a while.
Mhm.
Sure, you could do it at a tactical level, but functionally, you wouldn't hire a facilitator to go into Starbucks and tell them, here's the proper way to make a Frappuccino. You just wouldn't do that. What you could do is you could bring the top 10 baristas from across the US together and say, hey, are there any opportunities to do what we do better? Now that's strategic, right?
Mhm.
And you could absolutely hire a facilitator to help out with that conversation.
Again, like having these models can help the group because a lot of times we jump into meetings and we're not familiar with this. So I like how you very quickly establish the outcome of the meeting. Here's what we are going to do. Here's the time that we have or each person have to go through. Here's what is included or what we're going to discuss so that we're not, we don't go off into the rabbit hole on
Yep.
some technical issue. So it could be very quick and it doesn't have to be a lot of time to design the meeting. So with all these models, it's interesting because my last guest was also a facilitator and, wrote a book about frameworks to help facilitate meetings to get better outcome. And I asked the same question about what do you see change since like we have access to all this, right?
Yeah.
How have been your experience with meetings or gathering in general? Has it gotten better or is still the same or is it getting worse?
That's a really good question. That's one of those questions like, is the world getting better? Is the world getting worse? I tend to be a little bit of an optimist,
Hmm.
a pragmatic optimist when it comes to that kind of thing. What's changing was the other part of your question. Let me just get the whole AI thing out of the way. I think AI is I mean, that like seems to be like the knee-jerk reaction to what's changing. Well, clearly AI, but it's kind of I sort of hate that answer because it's like it's the one that everybody gives and it's like, well, okay, that's a C grade. Functionally, how do we use AI? Now that's the real interesting part, right? So
Hmm.
imagine that wall of sticky notes. I'll do this thing where I'll take a picture of it, feed it into ChatGPT and be like, all right, you've got 1,000 sticky notes here. Give me the top 10 themes, right? And I'll clearly have my participants vet those themes, but nobody can look at 1,000 things at once. That's one of the cool things that I think AI can bring us. Okay.
Hmm.
But I want to get past the AI, knee-jerk reaction to answer your broader question, which is, is the world getting better? Or is the world getting worse? I don't know. Watch the news. No, I think in meetings, what I've noticed lately is that there tends to be less of a tolerance for that strategic pause that we're talking about it before. I think that we developed some bad habits during COVID, which we haven't quite gotten rid of yet. That is to say, like, we're going to do back-to-back 30-minute meetings and expect that those things are going to be effective, right? I think that there's should be more time and space to allow for the humans to do some real thinking. Not AI adding noise, not taking a paragraph and turning it into an essay. I think that that just adds noise and it doesn't create anything useful. I do think that there does need to be specific carved out time and space for people to get outside of the office, get a hotel conference room or whatever they need to get out of the space, and really think about things and to maybe stop being so reactive and instead to really take a good balcony level view of what's going on with their organization, with the industry, with the environment that they're in, and be planful and thoughtful. There seemed to have been more tolerance for that prior to the pandemic. I think that that's dropped a little bit. I would like to see that come back.
I agree with you about the tendency to not wanting to step back or slow down and figure out what is it that we're trying to accomplish. I think even if we look at this not as things have gotten worse or things have gotten better regarding meetings and how we work as groups, there's a lot of noise, as you mentioned. There's the signal to noise ratio is not very not very good in terms of like, we have all the tools now with AI. Definitely, there's we could use it in
Right.
pattern recognition with the condensing a lot of information and get the essence of it, but that also create noise and make things that could be more simple, much more complicated.
Yep. Yep. I think that a lot of just listening to a lot of meetings, listening to a lot of smart people try to struggle with this.
Mm,
It seems like there's a logical fallacy that's called explaining by naming. Okay.
mm,
And that is, okay, well, here's our problem and it's communication. If we just communicated more, then this wouldn't be a problem. Well, that doesn't really work because all of a sudden we've hit the threshold of what people can reasonably bring in, right? The sponge can
mm,
only hold so much water. And so that's where we end up with a noise problem, with a friction problem. And it's like, okay, well, maybe it's not more communication, but it's better. How do we be more targeted? It's not about just blasting people.
mm,
I mean, how many alerts do you get on your phone that you just like flat out ignore? Because it's like, I must ignore all of the alerts from my bank. I don't know if my account has been hacked or if there's some new product for a mortgage that I don't want, right? It's really hard for me to see through that stuff, so I just ignore all of them. And I think that you can't do it just by explaining by naming. You can't just say, all right, we're gonna communicate more. You got to slow down and say, how do we do this better than we've been doing this in the past? And
mm.
in order to do that, you've got to take time to think about it.
That's the challenge, thinking about things when you're constantly running to the next meeting is very hard. It's very difficult. I have to say, like, with the visual, having people showing up to a meeting and finding some sort of visual cues, or whether it's guiding the process through some visuals or recording the essence, as you mentioned earlier, for graphic recording, that can help at least spark some ideas, or at least engage this part of our brain that are constantly looking for novelty, right? Because
Mhm.
if we go into a meeting, it's the same old boring meeting that we've always been to, we check out and we don't really participate. So having a facilitator who's a professional in facilitating and bringing people together, that can help set the stage or set the space for people to contribute.
Yeah, and just while you were talking, I looked up a couple of numbers. So here's some ROI numbers because occasionally I've gotten that question. It's like, well, what's the value of having you versus somebody who just talks in the room? Well, okay. So this comes from Robert Horn and his book Visual Language. So he's done some like meta studies. He's pulled up a bunch of other people's work. But what he's found is that when you use visuals in a group context, that it tends to improve consensus by 22%. In other words, you get 22% more agreement than you would otherwise have. Um, Retention goes up by 17%. Now that's huge. That's like the memory, like to what extent people actually remember what you tell them. And then third, now here's what Mr. Horn says is that it actually speeds up meeting time by 24%. Now, I haven't seen that. Most of the time, my groups will just run out the clock. But what I see is that they tend to be about 24% more productive. In other words, we can actually accomplish more on the agenda because of the concreteness that visuals bring, and we stop talking about things when they see it in clear black and white on the flip chart, on the butcher paper. So again, 22% for consensus, 17% for retention, and then 24%. You can pick your lane for this one. I would say it's about 24% more productive.
And I think there's also this side benefit that we, or maybe organizations miss sometimes. It's like when people see something as a group, they can decide if they're actually on the same page, literally on the
Yes.
same page, right?
Yes.
Because we walk away, everyone walks away with their own idea or understanding, and then that creates conflict, which cause more delays, which cause more problems down the road for delivering value or outcomes to the end customer or even internally within the organization.
Okay, so now this brings us back to the lizard brain. Have you got a pen and a piece of paper handy, Salah?
Yes.
All right, here's what I want you to do. I want you to draw a spiral, okay? Just draw a spiral, however you want to do it. And then whenever you're ready, I want you to show it to the camera so that I can see it. You ready?
Yes.
Okay, so for our friends who are online, I want you to describe your spiral, and I'm showing mine too. Okay, interesting. How would you describe your spiral?
I think it's just like for me, it looks like a spring, where, like going that all the way down. It's,
Yeah, it looks kind of like a spring, sort of looks like the sideways view of a slinky.
yes,
Now, the one that I drew is more like a whirlpool from the top down, right? Okay,
yes.
so this is one that I think like anybody could do this. You start a meeting, you say, okay, just grab a piece of paper and draw a spiral. And what will happen is that besides this, you'll get a whole bunch of different things besides just the two that you and I drew, right? Sometimes you'll have clockwise ones, sometimes you'll have counterclockwise ones. But the idea with it is that even something as simple as a spiral, people have different mental models of what those things are. So if we
Mm,
leave it to the verbal, you and I may walk out of the room with two totally different ideas of what that means. So here's where this brings us back to the lizard brain. Let's say that we are talking about an idea, and rather than talking about it, what you do is you take your idea, you put it on a sticky note, you hand it to me, and as your facilitator, I put it up on the wall. Okay.
mhm,
Now all of a sudden, what you and I are attacking is that idea and not the person who said it.
mm,
So by seeing this thing, by providing it, giving it some sort of physicality, giving it some visual presence in the room, it becomes something concrete that we can then play with and we have some objective distance from. It's not Salah's idea, it's the idea that
mm.
we're working on.
There's a overlap between the facilitation and coaching,
Mm,
and even from the organizational relationship systems, that people looking side by side on things are different from the mindset that we're both tackling the same problem together is
right.
different from facing each other and confronting each other about something I said and something you said, and we're going back and forth in that manner. Again, like these are all kind of subtle things or nuanced that a lot of times we don't think about when we are designing the space for a discussion. We're talking here about like maybe strategic planning. Like these meetings are, they require a lot of investment in terms of design and preparation. We're not just talking about like a daily stand up, for example. I mean, even though that's still a small indicator of how we run meetings in general, right? So, a lot of times I observe meetings and see how people are interacting that tell me about how the bigger culture is like in general. So I appreciate all the insights, Brian.
Yeah, thank you for offering. I think that the one of the most important takeaways is that you do not need to be able to draw to be a visual facilitator. It is just about understanding the group dynamic and offering tools and processes such that the people in the room can make their ideas concrete. And is it okay if I do a little plug for Lizard Brain and what we've
Yeah,
got coming up?
absolutely.
Okay, cool. So we teach a workshop. It's a 3-day workshop. It's called Think with Ink.
Mm,
And on day one, we cover graphic recording because that is foundational to the work. You got to know how to use big paper and markers. On day two, we talk about, well, the same stuff that you and I have been talking about this whole time, participatory decision making, and how do you use visual tools in order to create inclusive decisions. Day three, we talk about the design of visual templates and visual agendas, right? So that's really applying everything that we've learned to actually go off and create the kinds of meetings and experiences like the ones that we've been talking about.
Mm.
Besides that, I'm pretty easy to find. Brian@lizardbrain.com. That's my email. Feel free to shoot me a note. Would love to help anybody out with their design or talk about how to bring visuals into their work.
I appreciate your time, and I actually wanted to get into maybe that's part two in the next time we might record another one where at the individual level or the personal level, I know there's also this concept of sketchnoting or
Yes.
something that can help the person boost their creativity or thinking because a lot of time we have all these ideas that are in our brain and we don't get to put them on paper, whether visually or even just writing them down.
Yeah, I would love to talk to you about sketchnoting. It's, if you haven't heard the term, think of it as a personal practice
Hmm.
where you're doing visual note taking mostly for yourself. But whereas graphic recording is done large and on the wall, and sketchnoting is typically done small in a notebook, again, just for your own personal use. So I'd love to talk about that.
That's stay tuned for part two
Hmm?
on sketchnoting. Well, I appreciate your time, Brian, and thank you very much for the insights and all the ideas that you shared with me here. And I'm looking forward to speaking with you again.
Oh, thank you. Next time, my place.
All right. Thank you.